Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. It's another week of the Screen Sermon Podcast, and yep, we're dipping back into that version versus version ring for part 2 of TMNT 1990 versus TMNT 2014. As always, it's the Boon, and I'm here with Inky. Welcome back, Inky.
Well, hello, Boon. We've got our phonograph fired up since we're back in time this for the one. The needle is on. I think that's how they work. We're ready to go.
There's a part of me that wishes that you did a bunch of research about phonographs and you just really go into the nuts and bolts of how it works.
So in 1857, we Alexander Graham Graff. That'll be a bonus when we finally start a Patreon later, in 5 years. I'll give my entire report on early sound equipment.
Yeah, bonus eps will be Inky Explains, and it's just you're talking about early filmmaking techniques and equipment that's used.
Yes. Part 2, the zoetrope. We'll get into it.
So we were talking about performances when we left last episode, and specifically we kind of just talked about Will Arnett and him playing Vernon in the 2014 version. He's a character that's specific to the 2014 film. There is no Vernon in the 1990s. On the flip side, you've got Casey Jones in the 1990 version, played by Elias Koteas. Who's a guy that I've seen in, I would say, criminally less things than I should have. I wish that he's in more stuff. I think he's more of a TV guy.
He's been in a handful of other things. I think maybe most notably Seven.
He was in Zodiac. He was in Seven as well.
Oh, sorry. That is what I'm thinking of. Zodiac.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Fincher. Yeah. It's Fincher. So
Fincher serial killer movie. Pick your poison. Right. Yeah. But no, I've never seen Elias Koteas not good in something. I mean, I agree with you. I think I see him way too seldom, and that just kind of reaffirms that belief that, he is damn good.
Yeah. And we were talking talking about the merits of that character, and that was more about the writing, I guess. But Elias Koteas, I think, does a great job at playing the kind of down and dirty but good-hearted vigilante character who's just here to help. I think he does a great job, and his kind of romantic chemistry with Judith Hogue as April O'Neil is really good. The way they play off of each other and things like that. And
Judith Hogue was the other one this time watching, because they're the kind of two more adult characters, if you will.
Right.
They're the ones you could, in different ways, see in a different film. Casey would have to not be wearing a hockey mask and maybe beating people up, but I could see that their story in another film.
Yes,
they're the pieces that feel less like they're in an actual kids film, and largely because of those two performances. And I thought Judith Hogue as well, as a character that could have just been our cipher, if you will, kind of an every person. Mm-hmm. She's a reporter. In some ways, that's kind of what you're doing, is translating events to a mass audience. But no, I think she gives April a whole lot of character to be very on the nose about it.
Definitely. And I unfortunately, I think I was reading some stuff that she wasn't the greatest person to work with.
Oh, really?
I forget exactly what it was. And I think part of it is more born out of they wanted her to wear a yellow jumpsuit similar to what April wore in the cartoon series, and she pretty much just outright said, "No, I'm not going to do that because that's atrocious," kind of thing. And rightfully so.
I think she made the right
was
choice.
Some other stuff I heard. Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, in a live action film, I don't think that would have played as well as her kind of tipping the hat to the fans out there by wearing the yellow raincoat, like in her first scene.
Yeah.
I think that was fine. But I thought I had read some other things about Judith Hogan, how she felt about the film. I think it may have also been tying back to the violence. I kept reading about how the violence was something that people were concerned about, because this was a humongously successful children's television show that was now going to get its own full-length feature film, but live action. And so obviously kids are going to come out of the woodwork to see this movie. And I mean, there are parts of it that are, maybe a little questionable. Like when Raph's getting the tar beat out of him on the roof of the Antiques building, it's pretty rough, especially when they toss him through a fucking skylight. I mean, that's pretty violent. But when you compare it to the 2014 version of the film, not version of the film, but the 2014 reboot, it's much more violent. It's just the big difference is I think that the violence doesn't hit nearly as hard because it's one computer animated thing hurting another computer animated thing. Whereas when you watch it in the 1990 film, it's a stuntman in a suit getting tossed, from a height down to the floor below.
Yeah, no, I think impact in general is the difference between these two films for me, in on literally all fronts. Like we already spoke about, like the humor and the storytelling. I mean, performance wise, I think the voice actors for the Turtles, and like I said, I did like Tony Shalhoub in the new one. Yeah, but I mean, it's just kind of hard to touch the performances of those voice actors in the original. For one, they feel differentiated. They all feel like they're actually giving a performance. Like they're trying to kind of create a character. They're not just like, what's that? I get to, I get to get paid to basically not do the actual on-camera acting, That's why I miss movies that do animated films or partially animated or say puppeteered films that would include more professional voice actors versus like, hey, look, we got this famous person and this famous person and what have you. I mean, some of them do a great job, but other times it's kind of like, in the new Mario one, I'm like, that's just kind of Seth Rogen being Seth Rogen, Yeah. Which is hilarious to me, like in a lot of his earlier movies, but like, that's not Donkey Kong to me.
Yeah.
Conversely, with this group of voice actors that they got, I mean, that feels like Splinter to me. That feels like Mikey, Raph, Donnie, Leo to me. That feels like Shredder to me.
Yes. 100%.
Like I feel like they all tried to be somebody and, create a character with these performances. And even small little things like the Foot Clan people. The Foot Clan. Those Foot Clan people. Like some of those, they feel kind of standard, but again, like they sink into the overall feel of the movie. Like again, this feels like a late 80s kind of crime film.
Yeah.
So even though some of those performances wouldn't work in other films, many others, like they at least fit the overall, like the holistic thing of that the movie is trying to be. Which is a continuing thing. I mean, I could say for all categories here, 90 feels like it's trying to be a movie and knows what that movie is, and 2014 is just trying to be a theme park ride. Yeah. To the point where it ends with a literal like something like that may as well be a theme park ride.
Yes, I agree. And honestly, the sequel, Out of the Shadows, has a very similar action scene that leads to its climax, but it's the same kind of thing. I think instead of being rolling down a mountain in the midst of an avalanche, I think in the second one they're rolling down a river, like a raging river.
Oh, see, I'm talking about even later in the 2014 one, where they're coming off the building, because they basically look almost like they're riding something, you know what I mean? Like the way they grip those things, it's almost like the shoulder harnesses that you see come down.
I was taking your comment to mean their unending slide down the side of this mountain during an avalanche, where they're also fighting while out of control, like their vehicles going out of control down the side. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like a Tower of Doom ride.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll get to that later. But honestly, that truck down the mountain scene was one of the two things I really enjoyed in the 2014
Yeah.
one. And I think I already kind of previewed that last episode.
Yeah.
Well, and again, like a few more performances in the newer one I mentioned before. I don't think Megan Fox is bad in this. I know I differ a little bit with SR, who shared his thoughts with us since he couldn't make it earlier in the chat. I think she's fine. Like, I think she could even be better. Like, I've only seen a couple of movies with her in it, but I'd like to see more. I think she's got some potential and some promise, and I don't even think she's a terrible choice for April. Really,
I don't think so either. But the way that they wrote it, she doesn't read as April so well. I don't know why though. I don't know if it's me just rebelling against it because I don't want it to feel right. I don't know.
Let me like her. And then there's like a scene with her and Whoopi Goldberg, and I'm like, either of these performances would be fine in some movie.
Yeah, and
that's what I kept telling myself with different aspects of 2014. Some of this would work. It doesn't here.
Yeah, this isn't it.
Yeah, this not the one. Actor who played Shredder in the newer one, didn't mind him. Didn't mind his performance either. Not much of him.
Yeah, there's not a lot there.
William Fichtner, who I think is good in most things, is again giving a performance. He's pretty on tack for what I'm used to seeing from him, but just it ain't working here for some reason. There's just like not enough connective tissue for even skilled actors to actually make something out of the material they're dealt with.
And then it also boils down to I guess the way to kind of round out the performances thing would be the turtles themselves. And from what I understand, I forget the guy's name, but the guy that did Raphael, evidently it was his idea to do, and he was also the only one that did the voice performance as well as the physical performance.
In which version?
In the 1991, sorry.
Oh, okay.
But evidently it was his kind of concept or idea that Raph should have a Brooklyn accent. And that's been something that has kind of followed Raph through a bunch of the different media over time. I feel like he's always presented as having this different accent from his brothers. Josh Pice.
That sounds
something
right.
Like that. But evidently he's the one that came up with this concept that, Raph is going to speak with a Brooklyn accent. And then the 2014 one, I feel like they still kind of subscribe to that a little bit. I don't know that that's a Brooklyn accent, but it's definitely a different accent compared to his brothers. And, I don't know what the characterization is there where, like, Raph for some reason adopts this New York accent and the other ones really don't. But it's just something that when I see Raph now, I kind of ascribe this accent to him. And it's just because of a decision that a voice performer made. So I thought that was great. And also kudos to, what's his name? Steve Barron, the director, for letting that go and not trying to change it or anything. I'm looking at his filmography. The only other film of his I've seen is Coneheads.
Oh, nice.
Which is what he directed right after this. So yeah, I think that, like you said, I mean, I felt like they went for notable names in the 2014 one, like, oh, well, we got Johnny Knoxville to be Leo this time and all this other stuff. But I don't remember a single thing that Leo really does or says. Nothing stands out in that performance to me.
Well, and Knoxville's a funny person, like I have to say that, in more ways than just like the stunts that he's known for in Jackass. He's honestly a pretty funny guy. He's got a lot of charm to him, but I don't see him as any of them, the Turtles. As much as I like him. Yeah. I mean, he would seem, I guess, because of he's a naturally humorous guy that likes to be like a Mikey, but I'm like, nah, he doesn't have the right energy.
Right.
Like he doesn't have that like kind of quick animated youthfulness.
Yeah, he reads more as like a cynical type, I think.
Yeah. He's a little bit more laid back, a little more laconic even.
Yeah. And outside, I mean, Raph is the one that I kind of pinged onto because of his, like I said, in my opinion, he is the main character of the 1990 film, and so you just get a lot of Raph in there. He certainly gets some attention in the 2014 one as well, in that, like, Shredder almost kills him, basically, almost cracks his shell, stomping on him and stuff. But I mean, yeah, outside of that, I just don't... Alan Ritchson played him in the 2014 version. I don't know who that is. Although now that I'm looking at him, yes, I do. I've definitely seen him before.
That's what I said too, because I caught him on the like the little tiny thing of his face on the X-ray, and I'm like, oh, yep, him.
You know what I know him from? He played Hawk in the Hawk and Dove episode of Teen Titans on HBO.
Oh, okay.
That's what I know him from.
That we throw into the film.
So random. Yeah. But evidently he started off as a stuntman, and so he does a lot of the... I think he may have also done the physical performance of Raph as well as the voice. I don't know 100%. Anyway, like I was saying, the performances just don't... It's not really there. There's nothing memorable. And I mean, I think it's not just about the writing, but also about the way that the characters deliver their lines or deliver, you know, or their presence in a specific scene. Like, that's the reason. And I also recognize that age has something to do with it too. Like, you and I were a certain age when we first started watching the 1990 film, and so it's stuck with us all this time, whereas we were in a completely different age bracket almost 10 years ago when the 2014 film came out, and, you know, my brain was no longer ready to absorb all things TMNT, and now all I'm doing is stacking it up against this 1990 film that I love dearly. But there was nothing in there that changed that for me, or like there was nothing in there that was able to kind of overcome some of those feelings, because nothing in it was that memorable outside of, you know, little bits like the elevator beatbox scene and stuff like that. And it's like, that is a performance. I mean, from what I read, they had them improvise that whole thing, which is fun. Like, that's a lot of fun. But outside of that, there's nothing there. And you know, there's some specificity that they put into the Turtles in the 2014 one that I like. They really leaned into Donnie being more of the tech, you know, intelligence and gadgets, and like that's more of his forte. You know, I feel like Raph was always the bruiser. Even in the 1990 film, they definitely presented him as being kind of the more physically intense of them, and he has an anger problem and things. You know, but giving, like, Donnie has like a slimmer body. You know, Michelangelo's the shorter one. Raph is the kind of hulking one out of them, and then Leo's kind of the in-betweener.
According to the original Raph song, Raphael
he's also the
is
balanced
the leader.
one, and that's why he's the leader.
According to Partners in Crime, yeah, he flat out says that. I don't know if that song's canon. No,
oh, really?
So we'll have to see.
Huh. Well, and I also remember that this is just a quick little riff thing.
Yeah,
it's funny that he's the red
earlier
turtle
on they all had red bandanas.
Because originally, evidently, weren't they all red? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, which is smart, honestly.
And in the cartoon, they
every
changed it so
Sentai
that
show
they
and a
could be
whole lot of
easily
other kids
identified,
media.
right? Yeah. It makes sense. Because I think in the 2014 film, and there have been ones prior to this one, they've definitely fooled around with like skin tone for them, where like I know Donnie is usually presented as having like a darker green or like a kind of mottled like speckled green kind of thing going on. They try to differentiate them in their skin as well as their size, and then they do the color thing with the bandanas. So I don't know. I'm kind of as far as performances go, I feel like I'm out. I don't know if there's anything that you're missing. I have nothing to say about like side characters like Karai. She's barely in that 2014 film, which honestly just kind of adds to the demerits to me. It's just like you threw this named character in there and gave her nothing to do, and she's pretty wooden, like. But she also doesn't have a lot.
I'd like to give another small shout out. This is another great.
What is she supposed to do?
Again, character actor thing. But I thought Jay Patterson as Charles Pennington. I'm having trouble finding his name, but like the police chief in the 1991. Also, like for the scenes he has, Chief Stearns, excellent. He's just immediately okay. This guy's an asshole. Every scene you get of him, yep, he's an asshole.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. Man, this is such a small weird thing, but I was reminded of it just today because I have an office phone, and whenever I dial on that, I always picture that little like that close shot of Chief Stearns dialing the thing. So when I know I'm supposed to be talking to an important vendor or associate of mine, I always just want to start off with like, "This Charles Pennington, got a son named Danny Charles." Anyways, okay, and two kind of.
There's something about the sound design in that scene. Yeah. Because the way that the phone buttons sound when he's punching them in, and then like him leaning back in that old creaky leather chair,
there's a couple
that
like
sound
this in
has stuck with me
it's
for
just the
30,
sound of like
40
bags,
years of my life.
Like the way people like touch bags and like other small things like that.
Oh, really?
I still remember that sound. Also, things just had a weird.
Yeah.
And things had different textures back then too. Like you got different. Yeah. You got more angles.
It's weird how stuff sticks with you.
Everything had to look smooth and modern, like we do nowadays. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do kind of miss that. No, that's actually almost a good transition into the technical and effects. I just wanted to give two small. I mean, not even shout outs really, but I think most people now know Sam Rockwell plays one of the head. He's not really quite a full foot. He's more like one of the crony-ish types.
Yes.
Something I kept seeing, and this will connect to an older episode.
Like a couple of toes.
I kept seeing this, and I could not actually find him. I kept seeing it on the X-ray. Skeet Ulrich. Skeet Ulrich, and apparently Scott Wolf too, which I didn't even see.
Skeet Ulrich is in this?
They're just unnamed members of the Foot Clan.
Really? And they're just like, oh wow.
Yep. And the dude.
No shit. Billy Loomis is
right.
Part of
they got an
Foot?
actual psycho on their team.
They just became that much more dangerous.
We had mentioned him before, but I don't feel like we gave him quite enough. Yeah. Michael McConaughey as Master Tatsu. Oh, excuse me. That's just the voice cast. Toshiro Obata that's another weird thing. I didn't realize how many voice actors that weren't the physical actors. I think I saw that with Shredder as well. But I give it up. Yeah, Tatsu feels so on point, which I mean...
I think I realized it with Shredder, but not with Tatsu.
Now I wonder what like a Mr. Obata actually sounds like, if he just sounds like me.
Yeah. Definitely. And I mean, if you want to do a 1-to-1, like talk about lieutenants for Shredder, like Tatsu versus Karai, it's not even close. Like he is so memorable, and he does such great things in that movie that you see from like the Bruce Lee forever.
Movies. Like there's always like of course the final villain, but you always have that second who just like again doesn't talk much. But you don't even need him to talk. You need that kind of physical performance and that look, and man, Obata has that.
Right.
He walks on the screen, you're like, bad motherfucker.
Yes. And then he does some amazing, amazingly intense facial expressions and things like that. But it turns out we can't give him credit for his line.
You know what's coming.
Because
a little Primatine will clear that up.
Oh my god, you know what I realized? That Elias Koteas as Casey. Some of his dialogue is fucking phenomenal. And of course, when I was a kid, it just didn't land. But now I completely get it.
Looked at another
when
guy
they're poking fun at him about being claustrophobic.
Which he misunderstands twice too. Because if he's not homophobic, then I'm like, well, yeah. Yes. Claustrophobic.
Two different layers of not understanding at all what they're saying. But then the brilliance of the fucking movie is he decides to go sleep in the truck and he can't get comfortable, so he has to roll the window down.
Well, that's another rewind to
so good.
Let's just do a watch along right now. Honestly, I thought about this just earlier today. And I'm like, we should have just done 1990s Turtles, an appreciation. But Turtle Theory.
That would have been great. Appreciation and
this is
theory.
Another quick rewind to the writing thing. Like the way you can, I kept talking about buttons and things like that. The thing I liked about like humor in not capital C comedy movies of this time in the early 90s is there's that Shane Black thing where he said this in an interview. A lot of times they'll just throw jokes out.
Yeah. As
we kind of do when we're just kind of like talking, you know? We're not like aiming for an audience in that kind of, you know, trying too hard, desperate-y way. People are just throwing them out there, you know? I don't think it's loaded, kid. Just things like that. Which is what I expected all New Yorkers to talk like. And then 20 years later, when I actually took a trip out there, they did not. Some did. Don't get me wrong. There were some, but not all.
Definitely.
Whoa there, folks. Okay, really sorry about the interruption. It's the Boon here, and I have some unfortunate news. So while recording the TMNT version versus version, 2014 versus 1990, as I was cutting the second part of the episode, came to realize that there's an entire 35 to 40 minute section of this episode that I am, it basically sounds like I'm talking to myself. Something happened with Riverside. We use Riverside FM to record our episodes each week and to meet up via video chat. And sometimes things happen with it. You may have heard me discuss in the past how, you know, Josh might be missing from an episode because Riverside is giving him some issues. Specifically because he records on a phone. He doesn't have a laptop at the moment. So beyond that, occasionally when we run into some dodgy connection problems, you may have seen in some of the previous episodes that occasionally it sounds like we're talking over one another, and I think it ends up being this lagging issue that happens, and we actually got the absolute worst version of this technological hiccup on this past episode where Cody's audio just completely dumps. So you get no Inky about, 25 minutes into the part 2 here. So it really just becomes, if I were to leave the episode in as it was, it would literally just be me talking to myself and reacting and laughing at things that you cannot even hear them being said. So in lieu of doing that, I went ahead and I cut that part off, which sucks because Inky and I were having a really great conversation to kind of round out the version versus version for the TMNT franchise. And so instead, I think what might work better in this case, in order to give you at least a rounded episode here and a little bit more content, because we had to effectively cut this episode in half, is I figured I would pop in here and first of all apologize very much for the technological problems that we're having, and instead I thought that I would jump in here with a little bit of solo Boon action, and here was the concept that I came up with. So very simply, the easy thing to state here is that the 2014 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film, we're really beating the shit out of it during this VvV. We clearly have a feeling that the 1991 is the superior Ninja Turtles film. A lot of people out there think that it's one of the greatest comic book films of all time. It obviously hits the nostalgia button for us, and we feel like 2014 misses the mark in a lot of ways. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a look at it in all of the negativity that we've said throughout the course of, hour and change that we've been talking about the two films, comparing them to one another, we've been talking pretty negatively about the 2014 film. And so what I wanted to do is go ahead and just say yes. Inky and I, without a doubt, vote in any way, shape, and form for the 1990 Ninja Turtles film. We find very few redeeming qualities in the 2014 film. But I also recognize that there are probably fans of the 2014 film out there. And so rather than just beating them up, I wanted to give some credence to the 2014 film. And the way that I was going to do that, I was going to fill in some time here. I was going to hang out with you guys for about 10 to 15 minutes here, just to give you some kind of an ending to this episode. And what I was going to do was do Boon's top 5 things to like about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014, the Platinum Dunes feature produced by Michael Bay. And so that's what I want to do here. So let's start it off. So number 5, brutality, calls back to the original source material. This is a brutal film. This is the most brutal I think we've seen the Ninja Turtles, specifically in a film. Most of the action and the fight scenes and things like that, they're generally kept pretty tame for the most part. You know, Raphael's beating in the 1990 film when he's thrown through the skylight and things like that, like, it's pretty violent. But this is the first film where the Turtles actively kill foot soldiers in this film. Like, people actually die. There is some true to form, like, physical stakes here. You know, Shredder stomping on Raphael's back during one scene in the film where you can hear the shell cracking and things like that. Like, there's some very, like, intended danger where people die. People lose their lives. Shipping containers are thrown at foot soldiers. There's a foot soldier that's thrown through a moving subway train. I think we referenced that in the other episode. Like, there's no way that guy survived that. And that is very much a callback to the source material, because my understanding is, and I think I said this also in part 1, I never read the original source material. But to my knowledge, it was a very violent comic book. And they really didn't pull many punches. There was a lot of hot button items in those books. Amongst the violence, I believe there was also drug use, like prostitutes and things like that. Like, they didn't hold any of that stuff back. And the cartoon that ended up, coming out of that original series in 1987 obviously did away with a lot of that stuff from the original source material. The brutality of this film, the impact that the blows land with and things like that, the broken bone sounds and the blood. I mean, there's a little bit of blood here and there in the film. It absolutely calls back to that original source material. So if you're looking for more of an edgy version of the Turtles, you're going to find it here. And that also is certainly noted because this is the only film in the TMNT franchise that has a PG-13 rating. Moving on to number 4, the mountainside action scene. I will say, if there's a best part of this film, the mountainside action scene where the Turtles are fleeing from the foot soldiers down the side of a mountain is certainly worth checking out. If you could just basically isolate that scene, it's pretty incredible. It's a CG fest. I mean, there are lots of effects in this scene. To the point that the Turtles aren't physically there, so that's part of the problem. But obviously, a lot of the things that they do with the vehicles and stuff like that, they're not going to be able to do for real with stuntmen. But what I will say is that from a creativity standpoint, it's very creatively pieced together, as one thing leads to another as they're careening down the side of this mountain. The way that they pieced this whole thing together, storyboarding it and things like that, must have been very fun. It's a very fun scene. It's probably the film at its best. And I don't really have much else to say about it other than, this is certainly a part that should be checked out. Number 3, the fan service. I will say that this film has quite a bit of fan service attached to it. They call back to comic books, they call back to the cartoons, they try to include a lot of different things, or pay homage to things that we've seen in the past. Vernon Fenwick is a character in this film, and he was obviously one of the more well-known minor characters from the 1987 animated show, and that's April's colleague from the news station she works for, and he's more antagonistic in the original cartoon than he is here, where he's kind of a simping kind of love interest who has a crush on her. He's played by Will Arnett, who is mostly wasted in this role, but just the fact that he's been included in here is a bit of fan service, a little tip of the hat to fans of the original cartoon. Will Arnett, I think, was a great casting choice for a character like Vernon. Just what they wrote for Will Arnett to go out there and do, wasn't specifically interesting or worthy of his talents. I also will include the fact that they added some diversity among the turtles, which I do think is a fan service thing, because that certainly became part of what was going on in the cartoons. Specifically, I think that started in about 2003, where they started to depict the turtles as having, different skin colors. Some of them are darker than others. Some of them have, more modeling or spots and things like that. Donatello is leaner, he's taller. Michelangelo is the shortest one. Raph is the widest one. He's built, like a brick shithouse. And it just really helps with the concept of trying to differentiate them from one another, especially guys like Raph and Michelangelo, who it used to be pretty easy to mix them up in certain, scenes in the 1990 film, because the orange and the red can look very similar. There's a lot of other things like, April's yellow jacket that she wears, calling back to the yellow jumpsuit that the April of the cartoon wore. And they did that with Judith Hoag's depiction as well, when she wore the yellow raincoat in the very opening, or one of the opening scenes of the 1990 film. But it's all good things. The TCRI canister, the talking about how they play a lot with this concept of there being aliens and things like that, and which I'll get to in a second. But the mutagen that transformed the turtles and their enemies and stuff like that was of alien origin. So a lot of that kind of stuff is being incorporated into the film, very much in a way of like tipping the hat for fan service purposes. So they do a good job of that. Whether or not the fan service is tied up in a film that people really want to sit there and watch is a question, but you can at least appreciate that they put those things in there. Number two, they did pay attention to criticism, and you have to at least give them some kind of credit for that. They received a lot of backlash about some early information about this script, about, rumors that were coming out about different things related to what they were going to do with the storyline. And people were shitting all over this film before it ever came out. This was one of those ones where it really didn't have a chance to live up to any kind of expectation, and then it didn't. It did not subvert anybody's expectations when it came out, but it didn't really get off of the blocks very well. There was this whole thing about the turtles being aliens in the first place, that they came from another dimension or a planet. Obviously, that does end up holding some kind of water, because that's where the mutagen is from, but they ended up scrapping the whole idea of the aliens. Shredder was also supposed to be an extraterrestrial at one point, where his body just kind of grew these blades out of the very familiar places of where he wears blades on his armor, which obviously people weren't too keen on. And then the very title of the film, they were going to shorten it to just Ninja Turtles, and that received a bunch of backlash. And so, they did incorporate and make these changes. Now, there are other things in there that there was some intention to include a bunch of other things. Now, this already has a pretty extended runtime. It's about 12 minutes longer than the 1990 film, and in a movie, 12 minutes is quite a bit. And for what they're doing in the film, it feels really long. Like, to the point where my wife was falling asleep during the climax of the film when they're battling Shredder on the roof. Like, that's how disinterested she was by that point. And they did a bunch of other things to kind of avoid bloat, which was nice. I mean, for example, there was a lot of things that were intended to be introduced in this film, but they decided to hold off until the sequel, which was a good idea. They were going to introduce Krang. They were going to introduce Bebop and Rocksteady. They were going to use Baxter Stockman a little bit more than they ended up using him. They ended up pushing all of that stuff to the second film, which was a great idea. This already had enough going on. And I think that trying to pay some kind of respect to Shredder and the Eric Sachs storyline, like they were trying to make something out of it there, where Oroku Saki was a businessman who was funding the Foot Clan and things like that in the original source material. Here they're anglicizing the name into Eric Sachs. There was something about Eric Sachs was actually supposed to be the Shredder himself that, I think there was some early draft stuff that got shit on, and so they actually decided to include Shredder in the film. So as bad as things were, there was a lot of setup out there where it could have been just absolutely unwatchable. And kind of like, I really wish that the fan criticism and that the editing and stuff like that of concepts would have happened more to like the Dragon Ball Evolution film that came out, because that was such a far cry from what fans actually wanted out of a Dragon Ball film. This actually resembles a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film. It just doesn't do it very well, and there's a lot of reasons why they missed the mark. But the fact that they paid attention to criticism and then altered their plan based on that should be commended. And then my last thing that I can say, my number one reason that you should at least appreciate the 2014 TMNT is that it keeps the Ninja Turtles brand relevant. This is on the back of the 2012 cartoon show that Nickelodeon put out that was relatively successful. They decided to take another swing at the live-action film market to see what would happen. And, it's off the back of the success of this film that TMNT can continue to be a brand today, right? Or at least not necessarily a brand, but one that people can lean into and say, hey, why don't we do a movie about the Ninja Turtles again? Because if this didn't come out, or if this was a colossal failure, where it potentially was a colossal failure from an artistic standpoint, but not a financial standpoint, we might not see another Turtles movie for a long time. This brand might be left to just kind of die a little bit, or, to be resurrected later down the ride along the line as a nostalgia act. In this case, they had a $195 million budget, which is huge. I mean, it's obviously the biggest budget for a Ninja Turtles film there's ever been, by far. And they grossed over $400 million worldwide. I mean, that's a huge return on investment. And I think this film was out for 2 weeks, and then they greenlit the sequel. And by the way, the sequel, Out of the Shadows, while still not a perfect film or even a good film, is far superior to this first one. You should definitely check it out. Bebop and Rocksteady are great in it. Krang is depicted very well in it. The Technodrome is in it. There's a lot of great ideas in there that you can really appreciate that they held off doing in the first one, because they managed to put more of the focus on it the second time around. A lot of the design concepts and a lot of the things that they decided to do in the second film are good. There's still a lot of hangover from the first film that ends up affecting the quality of the second one. But absolutely go out of your way to see Out of the Shadows. It's a fun one, and there's a lot of cool stuff in there. They had some cool ideas. They still didn't manage to kind of hit the home run and bring it back into a good film, but it's a lot closer than this one. Excuse me. And the last thing I'll say is that, having seen Mutant Mayhem in theaters with my children here in the late summer of 2023, I have the success of the 2014 film to look at and say, this movie probably doesn't come out if that movie failed, or if that movie didn't, make an appearance. So I enjoyed Mutant Mayhem very much. I certainly enjoyed it more because it's me getting to enjoy and appreciate the Ninja Turtles that I grew up with, now with a new generation of fans of the franchise who happen to be my kids. And so they enjoyed it. They got a lot out of the movie and had a lot of fun with it, and so did I. So thank you, 2014 TMNT. Thank you, Platinum Dunes, for taking a chance and trying it out. I'm sorry that artistically you just don't seem to understand exactly what it is that people are looking for out of a Ninja Turtles film. But again, when you're also being put up against the giant that is the 1990 film, there's a lot to live up to there. So yes, the 2014 film is going to take the L in the version versus version matchup against the 1990 version. But I wanted to at least record this piece to say that the 2014 version was not without its merit. There are some good things that came out of that film being made. So with that being said, thanks so much for hanging in there with us this week. Again, I'm very sorry about the technology hiccups that we've had with Riverside, and hopefully we don't have these connection issues again. Please reach out to us at Screen Sermon on X, You can also, of course, comment here on the YouTube videos. We love interacting with our fans. We would love your suggestions. We would love your recommendations for films that we should watch. And also, any other questions that you may have or comments, please send them to screensermonpod@gmail.com. And we will be back next week as Josh and I cover the November theatrical and series releases and talk about our top 3 most anticipated releases coming in that month. So look out for us then. See you next week, everybody.